the picture, so I can easily read them out. From Teun Bimont, from IST, we had a question from him before. He's really enthusiastic, helping us with getting questions. Maybe a question for the end of the afternoon. The footprint of milk drops with 35% over 30 years, till about 8 kilogram per liter. So, yeah. What are FrieslandCampina goals for 2030, 2040, and 2050? Well, actually, we've seen the answer for that. And does a national emission reduction strategy allow to maintain our national milk production level unchanged if we are able to achieve those goals? So if we meet the goals that are now just presented, can we maintain milk production levels? Do you think the government will let us? That's the question.
Yeah, I think he knows the answer. You cannot answer that question without working for the government, I would say. So yeah, there's no real answer to that. No. I think we can, as an agriculture as a whole, we can reduce much further than we are doing at this point. We can go faster than we are doing at this point, but it would require that the government gets back to par, I would say, which they haven't been for the last 10 years. And that's an issue, so they need to step up, they need to keep up, and they need to ensure that we are working in the same direction. At this point, I would say they are running around in circles and have been doing that for the last 5 years, and that doesn't help.
So we also need them.
For sure, to be consistent and concise, I would say.
A question from Jan Geurts from FrieslandCampina, a colleague of us. It's about innovation. You have presented a little bit about it. I'll read out the question anyway. Which novel disrupting technologies and innovations do you see for carbon footprint reduction in the coming years? You have presented a few of them, but is there anything more? And are they really optional or required to meet the goal in the end? So do we need these innovations to be successful? Or can we go without them and achieve our targets? Or do we need even more innovation than we have right now?
Yeah, we discussed. I will answer this one. I think we need a lot of measures, because there's also, we now talked about an average dairy farm, but that's not how it works with FrieslandCampina. We have 9,500 at this moment. Everybody wants another solution. So we need a lot of different types of solutions. If you ask me what are the solutions of tomorrow, we already see the first things in feed additives, for example. Methane oxidation was already mentioned. I regularly have talks about companies that claim that they can reduce the emissions from manure storage by adding something. I think that will really take a fly, and that will really help. I think in our climate plan was already included some of the future measures that are not really ready for implementation. So we still need this innovation pathway. That is the answer to that one. But I also think that we could already revise the climate plan of 2 or 3 years ago, because there's already more things that we think will be implementable by 2030. So what you see is that the speed also of innovations and also people trying to help us or having ideas on how to do this is also accelerating. So I'm really hopeful on a lot of things that will be there in the future that we didn't think about yesterday. But it still will be a challenge. It's not done. It will not be easy, and it also depends, like Arnoud says, on the circumstances. So because they will also get more expensive, these measures. That is already, I think we already see that. And how is this reimbursed? How can we get that also done at farm that they will actually decide to do it?
That's also a little bit what the next question is about, how we get farmers into action. Now we've talked about this, maybe these questions were from a little bit early in the presentation, but why not organize an internal market in which FrieslandCampina tenders emission quota amongst their members? Is that what we already have, or do we have some?
Can we save that question to the panel and ask it to the court?
It says this rewards the farmers with lowest footprint with perspective to increase their sustainable production. You want to save the question for later?
I think it's a fair question, and I would like to hear the opinion of Cor about this. But the thing is, we are a cooperative, so that means that we our farmers have rights and obligations, And one of their rights is that they can deliver the milk to us that they produce. One of our obligations is that we have to process that. And that means that we can set some requirements on milk, but not at this point. A quota system is not in view, but I would be very interested to hear your view on it. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, you cannot see Cor. Maybe he
Yeah, you
can
can
stand
turn
up. But he's one of our panelists, so now that Arnoud asked him to be part of the question, just get him on the stage. I'll introduce him later, because Cor is part of our cooperative board, and well, you can introduce yourself a little bit as well.
I'm a dairy farmer with 140 cows in the north of Holland, and our farm is at the bottom of the sea. That's always very interesting for the listeners from the other countries. Last year we discussed how we can accelerate our climate plan, our reduction of our CO2 footprint. And one of the choices we made is we have not, you have to, because I think we call that the wattle and the stock. In good English is that how can we stimulate each other to achieve the goals. And what we said in our court and our strategy of the cooperative, we have very different kinds of dairy farmers in our community. And we have a lot of things that we have to achieve. For example, our CO2 footprint, our biodiversity. We have to improve our biodiversity. And what we have said, not every farmer had to do everything. So we have a group of farmers. They are very good in decreasing their CO2 footprint. But at the other hand, we have a lot of farmers. They are very good in improving their biodiversity. Together, we achieve our FrieslandCampina goals. That's the choice we made last year.
But the quota could help it.
Not for now.
Okay.
As we are running out of time, I ask Lodi to leave the stage, and we're going to add some people who I am going to introduce. Lodi and Arnoud, I've done them. I mean, heard about them. That's
They're interchangeable.
But Cor, I've introduced very shortly. He's one of FrieslandCampina's dairy farmers. He's a member of the cooperative board, and he focuses on carbon footprint sustainability indicators in that board. The second one I want to ask to come to the table is Hans Blom. He's director of Blom Sustainability. I just changed the name. It has changed half a year ago. Hans has 20 years of experience with consultancy, software, database development in carbon footprinting and life cycle assessment, mainly for the agricultural and food sector. And he's one of the co-authors of my paper because we needed him for the feed modeling. Blom Consultants supports also product environmental footprinting at the European level. So you arrive and I can introduce the next speaker. Johan Rijs, senior researcher from Wageningen Economic Research. He got a PhD about improving nitrogen efficiency of dairy farms. An important aspect, as we've seen in the carbon footprint reduction. Johan is participating in many different research projects on sustainable dairy with a broad picture, and we'll hear about that later. Also many years involved in the sector report monitoring, which was basically our anchor before we got the farm-specific footprinting to know how the dairy sector is improving. And then Corina van Middelaar, also from Wageningen University, but then from the Animal Production Systems Group. Got a PhD on the topic of GHG emissions mitigation along the dairy production chain. She's also a co-author on 51 scientific publications in the field of environmental impact. I don't know how you achieved that. Amazing. Covering, we just wrote one. covering topics such as carbon sequestration and animal disease effects on carbon footprint. And her research covers different countries, such as the Netherlands, of course, China, Indonesia, and New Zealand. All right, so 6 people at the table, and I have prepared a question for each of them to kick off. So, who will I ask first? Let's start with Jeroen, because he had 2 presentations today. What kind of hurdles do you see for data collection in relation to monitoring mitigation options to further reduce the carbon footprint of dairy?
The first one is speed, I think. We want to accelerate. So we want to accelerate on reduction. So we need more and more measures to also reduce, but then you also have to monitor it. The data is not always already there. We even might not know which data we would need to even monitor it at this moment. So that will be a challenge, I think, in the future. A second one I see is that internationally, of course, the data availability is also very much different from, let's say, a very specialized monitoring in the Netherlands. So how are we going to keep comparable monitoring and all in place? That is a thing. And then, of course, science, let's say, should also deliver the proof. That's also kind of the data we need, I think. So proof for what can help to reduce the footprint of dairy further. I think that is the main challenges.
And how do you decide that? What's the governance around deciding if a mitigation option works and to what extent at the global dairy level, preferably? A question for Cor. As a farmer and a cooperative board member, how do you look at the 2030 targets to reduce the carbon footprint? And do you think it's manageable? And what are your personal struggles or challenges for the cooperative?
Yeah, 2030, I think we can achieve that because we exist 151 years together, and in that time we always solved our problems. We always had challenges and we always did it together. So I think it's manageable. Do we know everything at the moment? No. As Arnoud and Jeroen said, no, we do not know everything at this moment. Are there coming new initiatives? Yes, very much. And what is at the moment one of the most difficult things, I think, how can we pay the things that we had to do? For example, my son and I, we discussed how can we use our manure or on a better way, because derogation is stopping within 2 or 3 years. How can we do that? Now, our discussion at this moment is we don't have enough cows, because when we have 200 cows, it comes better. So who is going to pay our investment? Is that the market? Is that the retail? I think it must be. Or is the government, in a consistent way, subsidy kind of that investments? And that's one of the problems from how can I do at home and how can we do as dairy farm the investments to achieve our goals.
And I don't know if everyone knows this, but if you want to invest in a manure digester on your farm, often it starts off with €1 million.
No,
and the business case gets better if you have more cows, because then you can produce also more biogas and you earn it back easier. Is that right?
Yes. And if I have, for example, a nitrogen, when I can treat my manure, then I have my own fertilizer. And fertilizer is very expensive for this at the moment. So you see a lot of attention to the monomestvergisting, to the digesters. And I think that's one of the pathways to achieve our goals.
Question for Corina. You're an expert on life cycle assessment and carbon footprint methods. So if we go back to the paper where we started from today, which methodological choices would you have approach differently, or what are you missing, and how would you have done this research yourself? She's much more experienced. 51 publications.
Well, first of all, I think you did a really great job, and I think also today shows that you really dived into the details and that it was a tremendous amount of work. So compliments for that. When I read the paper, actually two things got my attention, and that was that one of the conclusions was that emissions from manure management increased with quite a bit actually, and then actually part of the issue was solved by your presentation today, because when you look at manure management, you account for emissions from stable and storage. And because of the reduction in grazing hours, the amount of manure in stable and storage increased, and therefore emissions increased. Emissions related to manure deposited during grazing decreased, but these were part of the roughage production, if I understand it right. Also, an advantage of keeping the manure in the storage is, of course, and Cor mentioned it, that you can use it as a fertilizer and therefore actually replace synthetic fertilizer. So I think overall manure management is also contributing its part to reducing emissions. And that was not actually shown in the results as I interpret them from the paper. So I thought, okay, maybe there's something that I would have done differently. One other thing that got my attention was the importance of an increase in milk production per cow. And I think it's important to realize that when you use life cycle assessment, and then especially using a product-based indicator like carbon footprint, you will always find a reduction in the environmental impact when your production efficiency improves. There are also studies, for example, that look beyond the value chain. And these studies shows that the specialization of dairy and beef production as separate sectors might not be most beneficial in reducing the total sum of greenhouse gas emissions. So I think choices that you made to link actually the milk and the meat production in your study affected the outcome basically, and that when you would have looked at it in a different way, maybe you would open up the discussion for other ways to move forward instead of production efficiency.
Yeah, and it's of course very challenging because you have your own emissions and you can look even beyond. Sometimes also we struggle because, like Arnoud said, we didn't talk about scope 1 and 2, but there are interactions, of course, always what you do within your value chain, and you're not alone on the planet, like I started off with today, can affect also emissions in your scope, let's say 4, even outside your value chain. Yeah, very good comments.
So your challenge is increasing.
Even more complex than we exactly. But maybe we can look at this together in the next paper. Johan, also from Wageningen Economic Research. Your question, today we focused on the evolution of carbon footprint and raw milk and future reduction pathways. But what win-wins, hurdles and risks do you see when aiming to reduce carbon footprints?
Well, maybe first start with the compliment, because it's very impressive also when you look at the professional approach to the climate targets and the amount of work that's going into to monitoring this and to set up a program like this, setting targets in this way. So you see, what is all needed to get in action on this field. And I have a few points of attention I want to stress. I think the first one is don't go for too narrow focus on carbon footprint. With today, I know today is a deep dive into carbon footprint, but when you look at future dairy production, you also have to look at how do you get to positive biodiversity impacts, how do you fit in a circular food system. So yeah, keep up that broad scope on sustainability. I know that you do that with Biodiversity Monitor, but yeah, there's a lot of pressure from the market to focus on the carbon footprint. And yeah, I think that especially with the trend that's currently going on, to more societal ways towards more extensive, more nature inclusive dairy production, also take that into account as well, and make sure that you don't forget that and come to the conclusion, well, we betted at the wrong horse. So take it both into account. And the second thing it's also what Cor was mentioning. I think it's very important to really get into detail on the economic business model for farmers in different farm types. So not only for so be aware of what is needed for the farmer to make this change. What can a farmer do, and come to packages of measures that really work for different farm types. I think that's a lot of work. Still a lot of work implementing all these management practices. And the third part, I think I hit it already, but I'll make sure that take early action on that effects of mitigation measures are present in monitoring system, not only in the ANCA, in the Kingdom-Advisor, but also in the national monitoring system. Because if you don't register the data, if you cannot prove the impacts, you see now in the nitrogen debate, well, you have done actually all the efforts with no good result without showing the impact.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to stress.
The National Inventory Report is basically the monitoring of the government.
Yeah.
So of course, mitigation options should also be measurable there, because otherwise we'll get more political incentive.
That really requires early action.
Yeah, and a lot of explaining.
Yeah,
especially a lot of explaining.
A question for Hans. Currently, carbon footprint databases, as we've noticed when we were doing the study, only measure current environmental performance. Can you elaborate a bit if and how this should change, and what are the challenges in doing so, and how this could be done? And just to explain, it's of course a very good story if you can tell that the reduction occurred, but it's quite difficult to make such a claim if the data sets are only measuring current performance. Yeah.
Yes, it's an easy question, but not such an easy answer, I guess, or not so easy to organize. To understand, basically, you call it a carbon footprint database, but actually it was a broader database. Yeah. So it was on all environmental impacts. And you used Agri-Footprint, which has a history of 6 or 7 years. So there was some history available, but the timeline was much longer. And that was laborious to come up with, let's say, the assessment on how all things changed over the years. And I certainly think it would help to have, let's say, more historical footprinting data available. But I would also say, with all the policies set into motion and all the activities that are busy, you can also think about, hey, how would a future database look like? So to expanding the timeline basically to the overseeable future, because that can be meaningful in identifying your best changes for the future. So to give an example, just an example of our practices, but if you have a strategy to avoid certain energy production, which is loaded with fossil energy now or in the past even more, but in the future will not be more there, then you have calculated a mitigation strategy that is now valid, but maybe not in the future. And that can happen at many other places too. The fertilizers is also an example. So it was to replace fertilizers with manure in the past was much more an environmental benefit than it will be now or in the future even. So yeah, I'm really, by doing this project, also seeing that it was quite laborious, but I'm quite enthusiastic about the idea of creation of more, let's say, time-based databases where you have to, where you can do this more timeline assessment, historical, but also more into the future. Is it easy to generate? No, it takes quite an effort, but we are inspired to think in that direction to also have this more available for others too.
Yeah, thank you, and good luck
But we'll be there asking you for it. And we, of course, are also doing part of that for our own sector ourselves with the maatregel tool and which measure. But still, on a broader sense, for companies who set science-based targets, deciding how to achieve that, it would be really helpful to have future data sets as well. Arnoud, net zero dairy is a dream or an ambition or target of Friesland Cantina for 2050. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that actually is? Can it be done and how?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think Jan Peter showed a graph of net zero Europe and how we should achieve that, and net zero dairy is more or less the same. So we cannot achieve it on an individual farm level, pretty much. So we need to do it on a bigger scale, and then we could do that by reducing as far as we can reduce. So step away from fossils altogether. That helps, but not too much. And then we have to reduce the methane. We already have to start that today, obviously. We can reduce quite a lot when it comes to manure, I think. But yeah, a cow is a cow, eats grass or other stuff that we cannot eat, and makes that into nutrients. And the byproduct is always going to be methane. So we can reduce that, but we can probably not reduce it to zero. And the same goes for the soil. The easy solution for everyone is to stop using cows. But if you want products out of the soil, you will have nitrous oxide emissions. And those are even harder to reduce to get to zero. So that's where we need a magical solution or something more realistic, hopefully. But at some point, if you look at what's out there and what could be done, I think reducing emissions to about half where we are today should be technically possible. If that's economically feasible, that's a different thing, but that should be possible. And then we would have to start offsetting or cap, whatever. So carbon capture and storage, the storage in the soil might be possible. Stuff like enhanced weathering might be necessary, which is a dream for a lot of other companies, how to do that, and will that bring us to where we need to be? I don't know. But for sure, we cannot reach it on an individual farm level. We need it on a chain level, we need it on a global level, and we need to look at the total production system there. But for us as a company, and I think for the dairy industry as a whole, we need to take this seriously. We need to start working on it. And I know a few people online, quite a lot of our peers and competitors are working in the same direction that we are working, and we're working together here as far as that's possible as well. So we're looking for the solutions, and we need to bring them soon.
Yeah.
Does that answer all your questions, I think?
Not all my questions, but it is 4 o'clock. And I think it's a very nice answer to also finish today's seminar or webinar. Because indeed we all have to get moving on the way to climate neutral or whatever. But we have to get back to work and make sure that these reductions are going down.